I'm Doug Thompson. Welcome to this edition of Legislative Updates with John Barker of the Kansas House of Representatives for the 70th District. Most of us get our information concerning the actions of the Kansas Legislature either from some form of media or after the fact, as the legislation either became law or died during the process. Representative John Barker has graciously agreed to take time from his schedule to update pending legislation as the bills are moving through committee to consideration by the House of Representatives. Right after this short break, let's talk with Representative John Barker concerning this week in the Kansas Legislature. Welcome to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my co-host, of course, John Barker, and our special guest today, Dan Hawkins, from the representative from the 100th District, which would be Wichita area.
West side of Wichita.
And you've been here before. We appreciate having you here. And later in the show, we'll flash up the information, how you can contact Representative Dan Hawkins and, of course, John Barker. And this would be day 56 of the legislative session for this year. And week 9, I think I heard you say, John, before we started. So week 9. So what's happened this week? Because this is Friday afternoon. You guys have come straight from the legislature and coming in. So what's been going on this week?
Well, this was No Tie Friday. If
No Tie Friday. I like that.
You've got yours on.
I got my retrofit on.
We didn't get the message to you, No Friday. No, it's been a long week. We've worked bills about every day. Of course, it's past turnaround, so we're starting to work and hear Senate bills. This week in Fed and State, we've heard a number of bills. Probably the most important one for my district, the 70th District, Dickinson County and Northern Marion County, of course, is the racetrack bill to open up racetracks for horses and dogs. We passed it out on committee on Wednesday. Had a good vote. I think it was 14-8. So now we take it to the floor of the House. The leadership will decide when we're going to run it on the floor if we get it past the House. A similar bill has been introduced in the Senate. Either the Senate will work their bill or we will send the bill over to them if we pass it in the House, and at some point in time hopefully we'll go to conference because we have another bill that we're hearing this week which has to do with the sports betting. And we would like to marry them all up into one, but we'll see what the will of the body is. We've also passed out a couple of other bills. One was an important bill for Kdads, which the background checks for employees, like when they hire somebody at a nursing home or senior care or home health services, they need to have a background check, and we've had a lot of problems with that, where it would take 40 to 60 days to get a background. And you know, you can't ask an employee to wait 60 days to decide whether we're going to hire you or not. So we were able to get everybody together, all the service organizations and Kdads, and so we passed out a bill that will go to the floor of the House that will reduce that down to 5 days because we got a grant from the federal government which reduces the cost of the background check, and it kind of expedites and allows us to go into the different data banks to check on people's priors. We also amended that to comply with federal legislation that you can have certain types of convictions, but after a 5-year of no other problems. For example, if you were convicted of bigamy, a non-person crime, you would be eligible to work in one of those facilities. We had the bill last year. We had a lot of controversy. We put everybody in the same room to work out a solution. Everybody was on board. There was no opponents to the bill. So hopefully that will help nursing homes and assisted living homes and folks that work with folks in medical facilities, that they can get a background check a little faster. And then for the hospitals and the nursing homes, they'll be able to hire those people a little quicker.
So do some of those, in that setting, John, do those drop off like after 5 years, some of those convictions?
Yes.
They drop off just like an expungement would have.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that if you left one facility and went to work for another one, they do another background. Well, they were always checking, one of the requirements is check juvenile records. Well, if you're 20, your juvenile records are never going to change again because you're never going to be a juvenile again. So it's just one time on the juvenile records because you can't go back. But yeah, some of them do drop off, and I think with everybody on board, I think it's going to just, it'll help the nursing homes and the senior assisted living homes and stuff to be able to hire people quicker, which means you can't hire somebody and say, well, wait 40 days and come back, and if your background check comes back. And it also allows them to give them a job not with patients or clients, but they could be supervised, but they had to be under the supervision of one of their other personnel. So I think that's that will be helpful, and hopefully the Senate will take it up shortly, and if we get it to the governor, it'll become law.
Okay. All right, and then on this gaming bill, and Dan, we're going to come to you right after we take this break, but on this gaming bill, how does that work when the House is working on a bill and then the Senate's working on a similar bill? How do you marry those together?
Well, if we get it through the House and the Senate would get it through, probably one of the bodies, we would non-concur, we'd go into conference, it would be conferable as long as it passes one of the bodies, and put it in a conference committee and then take it back to our respective houses.
Okay. We're going to cut away, take our first break. You're watching Legislative Updates. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with, of course, John Barker, and also a special guest, Dan Hawkins. And Dan's out of Wichita, the 100th District. And, of course, John's out of our area, right in this area, in Chapman, Abilene, and surrounding area, and that's the 70th District. And, Dan, I know that your background is in, of course, insurance.
Absolutely.
But, and you've done a lot of that general work with the legislature. What have you been working on this week here?
Well, this week we've had several bills. We actually, a couple of weeks ago, passed out the telehealth bill. But we had one bill that we just got across the House floor this morning with what we call a concur. So it was 2106. It was a facilities bill that we passed out of the Health Committee last year, clear back in February of last year, but the Senate never took it up. And finally this year, in February of this year, the Senate took up that bill. It was simply to allow long-term care facilities or treatment facilities to be licensed or inspected by national accreditation organizations. And so it was a good bill. The Senate finally passed it in February of this year, and so then it comes back to me because it was a year later, they had to change some dates in there to make it right. And so then I have to look at it and decide if I want to take it to conference or if we want to just pass it on out to the governor. And so I decided to concur, which just means that I concurred with the Senate amendments. We had a vote, explained that to the body this morning. We had a vote, and now it'll go to the governor. So it's a lot faster than if we were to put it back in conference.
So the first concur means what?
First concur means it's just the first time that we've concurred on a bill coming from the Senate this year. We'll have a lot of those. So as these bills come back from the Senate, if it doesn't need to be conference, then we'll just concur with them and send them on to the governor. And so that's what we did with this one.
Okay, and when you mentioned about the accreditation, how was it handled before if it wasn't done at the nationally
Actually, that's part of the
accredited?
problem is before the Kdads, which is the organization that has to go around and inspect all these, literally it's a huge job to do that every year. By going to an accreditation system, they don't have to go and look at every single facility every year, which will free up their time to do some other things that's more important to them.
Right.
Probably avoid a lot of delays in there
Absolutely.
as well. And expense?
Yes. And expense,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Dan did the first concur. I did the first non-concur.
And what's that mean?
I'm cantankerous. No, it's I had a bill that had to do with microbreweries. We passed it out of the House 121-1.
Wow.
It went to the Senate. The Senate did hear it, and then they worked it, and then on the floor of the Senate, when they were working the bill, a whole new section 2 of the bill was put in. So it came back to me yesterday, and it was all new language, something the committee had not heard, nor the body of the House has heard. So I decided to non-concur, which I go up and make a motion to non-concur, and ask that a conference committee be appointed. When the conference committee is the chairman, the vice chairman, and a ranking member of the committee, and then now that non-concur will go to the Senate, and they will accede to, hopefully, to our request, and they will appoint a committee, the chairman, vice chairman, and ranking member on the Senate fed state, and then we will meet publicly in a meeting room, and we will debate the issue, and then decide how we want to proceed, whether I would take their amendment or whether they will strip out the amendment, and we'll run the bill as originally formed. Or we could, if we have other bills that are alcohol related, we could consolidate those into a bill. Instead of having, in the conference committee, instead of having one bill, we could have 2 bills or 3 bills. So hopefully I'll conference with my counterparts next week, but that'll be the first of many. We'll have a number of non-concurs, and of course I always like to have concurs when we can get them. But that's when the work really starts to get accomplished, is in conference committee.
But John, let me ask you on this, because I don't know, and maybe many of the people are in the same boat with me. When a bill comes back from the Senate, and sometimes I hear the story about, well, they tacked on an amendment to it that doesn't have anything to do with that subject.
Right.
Does that happen?
Well, normally it does. It can, but it has to be germane on the floor of the House. Now, the Senate has different rules for germaneness than the House. But it has to be related, and it has to have 2 points of contact. When I was Rules Chair, that's what I always looked for. If it was similar in nature and that it had 2 points of contact, and we still use that rule. So it has to be, for example, a health care bill is subject to anything health care, but they couldn't bring in a gaming bill on that.
I see. Okay.
But Dan was in Fed and State this week, right, Dan?
Yeah, I was. That was interesting, Doug. I'd never been in John's committee before, and with him running the gaming bill, I thought, it'd be interesting to go and see how that works. His committee is a big committee. It's a 23-person committee. It's an exempt committee, meaning he can hear bills and work bills clear to the end of session. I can't. I'm almost done. I only have 2 weeks left, and then we're really finished in my committee. So I went and watched his committee debate that gaming bill. It was interesting. Some of the debate, the speeches that were made. He had a couple of people that really tried to derail that bill, and he worked through it really well, and they got it out. So it worked real well.
Did you?
I was impressed.
Were you?
Yeah.
Well, with my experience with John, because John was a judge, and I appeared in front of him a lot of times, and I'm having a tough time kind of understanding this part when John says, well, and then we debate about this, because the John I remember was when I said, well, how about if this, and John would say, because I said so. And that was the end of it then, because I said so.
Well, and John still does that one.
Yeah, does he? Well, so Dan, what else you got coming up this week or this next week?
We got a couple of big things coming up. We've got a dental bill, a dental therapist bill, which is going to make it to where dentists can have a dental hygienist that has some more experience, some more education, and can do some extensive procedures that they haven't been able to do before. It's going to be a pretty contentious bill. We have a group of dentists that are totally against it. So we're starting to get lots of emails on that issue.
Wow.
And next Wednesday, I'll take that up and have a hearing on it, and I'm sure it'll be a good one.
All right, we're going to cut away and take a break. You're watching Legislative Updates. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm Doug Thompson, along with John Barker, representative from the 70th District, and Dan Hawkins from the 100th District, representative, and that's out of the Wichita area. Dan, I heard you and John talking a little bit before we started with something I'm not even familiar with the legislature called Krotom. What is that?
Krotom, Doug, that is something none of us knew anything about until about 3 weeks ago. Every year we get a bill that schedules controlled substances, and every year they add some substances to that. It went through the Senate, passed through the Senate with no problem. Nobody even looked at it. As soon as it got to us, we started getting massive amount of emails. I'd say, Doug, I've probably gotten 600 or 700 emails about one of the substances that have been put on the schedule. It's called Krotom, K-R-A-T-O-M. And Krotom is nothing more than a cousin probably to a coffee tree in Southeast Asia. It's one chromosome off of a coffee tree. And in Southeast Asia, they've been chewing on the Krotom leaf for years, probably centuries. It now has come to America, and it's used for kind of like a mild stimulant, kind of like coffee is, but also for pain relief. They're also using it somewhat for a way to get off of opiates, to wean themselves off of opiates. And so that was put on the schedule, and all of a sudden we started finding out that there were a lot of people against that. So I started studying, and John will tell you he's so tired of hearing about Kratom, he'd just soon not talk about it anymore.
That is true.
We had a hearing this week. We had 2 hearings. We had a hearing on Monday that was just about Kratom, so we could really get up to speed on that. Had a well-known person from DC in to talk to us, and then on Thursday, we had the actual hearing on Senate Bill 282, which included this Kratom. I believe what we're going to end up doing is we'll end up extracting Kratom out of that schedule. We'll do an amendment to take it out, simply because we haven't found the problems that some people might think is there. So that's you're probably going to have listeners here that know exactly what Kratom is, but we had no idea until we started down that road.
I've never heard of it before.
No.
Had you, John?
No, but what impressed me is that DEA has a control. They'll have the national schedule, level 1, level 2 drugs, schedule 1, schedule 2, and they do not list Kratom. They listed it for a short period of time and then took it back off the schedule. So anytime the federal government will put it back on, it'll affect Kansas. But why should we do something when the federal government has decided not to? I'm sure it's still in research. Until they put it back on the federal schedule, I don't think it should be on the state schedule.
Okay. And I know coming up this week with school finance, there's is it called an educational study?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And tell me what you anticipate from that, as far as what will it be, who produced it, and then what happens to that study.
Dan?
Well, we're on, I believe it's Thursday of this next week, on the 15th,
Right.
the legislature has commissioned a group out of Texas A&M, a lady that's done a lot of studies on virtually every school finance position in every state. And they've done a study to see if we're actually funding it properly. That study will come to us on Thursday of this next week, on the 15th. At that point in time, you can expect our committees to really kick into high gear and figuring out the response to the Supreme Court.
Right.
So we'll see what happens there.
And it'll probably be developing a new formula if we need a new formula. The lady who's doing it from A&M is also a Kansan,
Oh, she's from Kansas?
originally from Kansas. So it's a good fit. She understands the Kansas educational system and the difference between rural and urban. So I think I'm looking forward to the study. I think everybody is. And then from there, we'll create a formula that meets the adequacy that the Supreme Court has asked us to do.
Suitable.
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 Yeah.
Yep.
I like adequate better,
So
but suitable.
who authorized the study?
The legislature did. We did that back with the Legislative Council back, what was it, probably in December.
Yeah, it was when the courts came out
Yeah.
and said it was not constitutional at that time. The study that we had was many years old, 15 years old, and so it's out of date. So we really needed a new study to help us, determine exactly what the proper funding level is. So
Because remember, 2/3 of the kids, the students, are doing well. It's the 1/3, and that's the reason we need to be looking at how do we help that 1/3 achieve higher marks. So hopefully it'll happen next week.
Now, in regards to the school finance, I was visiting with somebody earlier, actually before we started the show, and he was telling me that years ago, probably in the late 70s, schools were funded entirely locally.
That's true.
And now, obviously, that's changed, and none of that came up before what we're having now. Is that correct?
well, and we had a, if you go back several years, we had a statewide mill levy.
Right.
It was actually originally a 35 mill levy, and then many years ago it was cut down to 20 mills statewide. We just heard in tax bill that will raise that mill levy over a 3-year back up to 38 mills,
38.43.
38.43 mills.
But over 3 years, it goes, from the 20 mills to 26 mills the first year, 32 mills the second year, 38 mills, 38.43 the last year. And that only raises $600 million, which is what the school boards are looking for additional funding. I think you heard it in tax. I'm not sure you're going to work it in tax.
I don't know that it'll get worked, Doug.
Yeah.
That's a pretty contentious issue, and probably property tax is the most hated tax there is.
That's true.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you with that. We're going to, in just a minute here, we're going to cut away and take a break, and then we're going to come back and we'll close up this show. But you guys got a lot of things going on, and you're a little bit past the midway point, so that teeter-totter's tipping towards the other direction. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson. This is the last segment for this show of Legislative Updates. So, John, what do you got going next week?
Fed and State has hearings on different bills. We've got a highway patrol bill. We have an amusement ride act that we passed last year, and this is kind of a trailer bill to it. So we're going to be full, and then Dan's got me working in Health and Human Services. We're going to meet probably every day. Mm-hmm. So it's full. You know, we're day 56. We're keep moving.
Yeah, I know that amusement ride bill certainly has helped people feel a lot more comfortable knowing that there's some supervision over those rides.
Well, there's inspections now.
Yes, inspections, you're right.
And that's important.
Right. Dan, thank you so much.
Thanks, Doug.
Hope you have enjoyed this segment of Legislative Updates with John Barker. I'm Doug Thompson with special guest John Barker. Tune in next time for another Legislative Update. Thanks for watching.